And what about other frameworks, things like Backbone? Backbone is the most common counter. Okay, a few there. Okay. So just to set some context, I'll kind of talk about fairly high level with each of these pieces. The mean stack is pretty, merits a whole talk or a whole day in itself. So I'll skim over the surface, introduce a few concepts, talk about how we built it and so on. And you can feel free to ask me questions, and I don't guarantee I'll answer them, but I'll give it a shot. How's it?
Yep. So which file? The PDF?
No, the PPT.
Where is that?
Don't tell me to make it across. Yeah, this one. Can you set it in a presentation mode?
Show it in the light.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Can you do it in the other way? Can you send me?
I will do that. Switch slideshow. This is what you want?
Yep, this looks good. Let's just see
So
this
that goes there.
plays.
And it should play.
Yep. Okay, sounds good.
So I will now
You want to get set
get
up
the
on
lights. Yeah, the camera is not working. We'll just transmit only this and your sound.
Okay.
So no face. Grab a seat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, I might just stand because I think
Yep,
I'm
standing is
slightly
fine.
more comfortable.
I'll shut some lights here so you can see properly. The front lights.
And just tell me if my voice doesn't reach you at the end of the room. Okay. So welcome to the talk. This is TripTips, our logo. We are really proud of it. So a little bit about myself. I started TripTips. It's an Uber for travel planning. The intent is to help people plan their trips using locals, and I'll talk a little more about it in a bit. My own background is in tech. I started out as a dev in Cisco on voice over IP routers, worked at HP doing an Android-like initiative, worked in the firmware for LaserJet printers. I moved to Microsoft, joined the enterprise storage team where I was responsible for the data protection APIs. If you heard of VSS on Windows, that was me. And I've also done things like deduplication and storage management. And from there, I moved to the Azure team, the Azure storage team, where I was responsible for Azure drives. It's like the EBS for Azure. And I also incubated the Azure drive import scenario. This is the scenario where you can upload massive amounts of data, like petabytes of data, by shipping physical hard disks to Microsoft data centers. And so after that, I moved to the Azure runtime team. This is the team that provides the APIs for managing your Azure resources, like deploying VMs, setting up load balances, the rest of it. And the last thing I did before I quit Microsoft was actually building the APIs for third parties to participate in the Azure marketplace. So you can have SendGrid, for example, provide email services, and the customer sees one bill for those services, and they can manage it one set of credentials. So that was my Microsoft story. And sometime in 2013, I actually, right after vacation, I relocated to the East Coast to be with my wife, and I got some ideas in a startup, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. So TripTips is our outfit, and we literally stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, those are the companies and technologies we built ourselves on. There's Mongo, Angular, the B is a Bootstrap, Express, Node. We use Google and Bing for discovering interesting attractions at places because we are a travel startup. We use Mailgun for sending email. We use Stripe for credit card payment processing. By the way, the structure of the talk, feel free to chip in with questions at any point. And I can take questions at the end too. Either works. So the overview, it's going to be, we'll touch on the mean stack, the components, briefly touch on what they are and why they're interesting, and also the stuff we learned and the decisions we made and why we made some of them. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the service, what we built. TripTips is an Uber for travel planning. And the motivation for this is, in a lot of, the typical traveler spends about anything from 35 to 40 hours planning a trip, a leisure vacation. And it's often things like looking up, internet, reading guidebooks, and that often doesn't work. My own example a live example of my own, when I was going to Thailand, my wife and I, we planned a trip. I planned to sail. We found a beach. I thought we'd be able to sail out there. I looked at TripAdvisor, Lonely Planet, etc. Couldn't really get an authoritative answer. People said, yeah, I've seen sailing happen there. The first thing I do when I get there, I discover there's no sailing because it's January and the tidal conditions don't permit sailing until Feb. And that was kind of a bummer. And then I asked around, and a lot more people came up with anecdotes like, yeah, there was a time when I picked a hotel. It was an inaccessible place, great deal, but I spent about a whole hour getting to and from the hotel to, the stuff I wanted to do. These are all things that a local wouldn't make, mistakes a local wouldn't make. So we set out to solve that problem. That's what got me thinking about it. So what's our solution? We essentially built a service where you can have customers, travelers connect with locals who give them insights on the place, like telling them where to live, how to get around town, what are the best attractions, advice on commute patterns. For example, in Seattle, like don't bother with being stuck in the South Lake Union area during rush hour. It's terrible. Stuff, commonsensical stuff. We also have an aggregation of the best tours, like whale watching, wine tasting that we've selected from our partners. We make available. This is the same stuff you see on Expedia. And we've also got great deals on things that matter to travelers, things like dining, entertainment, stuff that you want to use if you were traveling, all culled and put in a very convenient way to search. We get these deals, by the way, from Groupons and Living Socials. So it's the same stuff you see at these sites, but we've got them filtered so you don't need to wade through, say, carpet cleaning or car detailing and stuff like that. It's just the stuff you want as a traveler. So that's the big picture. That's what our service looks like. Okay, I've abstracted some details. So on the far right, you'll see the partners we have a API relationship with, people like Stripe, Mailgun, Living Social, Groupon, so on. Typically, these are all REST calls. How many of you are familiar with REST? Okay, so a fairly good. REST, by the way, is just a standard for making queries across to a service to fetch data or perform operations. So we use all these guys for different purposes. We have our data on EBS. We use MongoDB. We've got our databases on EBS. We've got about 12 DBs sitting on an EBS volume. And this is what I'm showing you here is a topology for our MVP. We've got a scale-out solution, which I won't get into. So it's a VM out there. We use S3 buckets to keep our collateral like images, our DB archives, because we've got guides who we onboard, and when they make edits, we keep their stuff archived. We have records archived there. And we use the public CDN to serve out the libraries for Angular, Bootstrap, and the rest. So if you think about it, all these things play out to give the customer a web page, and our web pages are responsive. So if you go to triptips.com, it should look pretty good on your phone. If you've got a 5-inch and above phone, it gets harder with the 4 inches, and the old iPhones are a little terrible. But and that was our design center. As it turns out, travel planning is still primarily a desktop and tablet activity. The phones are not. So that's why we built it so that it works great on desktops and tablets, and also works quite well on phones. When you hit a Nexus 6, it's really fine. When you hit the iPhone 3, it's a problem. So that's the big picture. So what are the guiding principles when we built this? So my background, by the way, was, I've been a dev. As a dev, I wrote C and C++ code. I really didn't do any web stuff. And so when I got around to building the stuff, my goals were to keep it simple, keep it cheap, and make it so that people could move across the stack, from front end to back end and so on. The front end inevitably is HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. No escape from that. With the back end, you've got a ton of choices, right? You could have from databases, there's Mongo, SQL, there's MySQL, Postgres, the whole works. And in terms of the back end, server-side scripting environment, there's Python, PHP, Ruby, and many more. Node. So this is the filter I kind of applied when I started building this thing. I started out by myself before I found my co-founder. We sort of divvied up the work, so he did more of the front end and UI, and I kind of I did the back end DevOps and all that stuff. So let's take the first piece, AngularJS. So AngularJS is, in a nutshell, it's a framework to create single-page client apps. If you're familiar with MVC, for how many of you does MVC ring a bell? MVC, the concept, so model view controllers. So it's about model view controllers. The backend is fairly well known and common. For the front end, it's less so. Angular enables it for the front end. So you've got the same concept of routing. You've got notions like you can keep your data, you can keep your objects, like say you have a name object, you can have that name object, and you can have a user edit the web form, and the corresponding object gets updated automatically. You don't need to do binding yourself. The binding happens. So the view is what the user sees, the model is is the object where it's stored, and the controller is what changes the model to, which then reflects in the view. That's how it works. That's what the model view controller is all about. So AngularJS is an MVC for the client. It's got bidirectional data binding. So if you've heard of jQuery, jQuery does a lot of this stuff. Angular kind of does it for you. Just does it. You don't actually, you don't need to think about it. It just comes for free, if you will. It makes it possible for you to run almost a thick client app. If you remember the old days when there were these, this big, literally a thick client, it was an exe of sorts, and the exe would communicate across to the server. Angular permits that scenario. You've got a relatively thick client that is basically HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript, which is talking REST, shuffling JSON across to the server, and essentially changing state, putting state back in, fetching new stuff, and displaying to the client. It's really light. It's about 50K when it's minified. So it makes it a pretty interesting framework. So that's all the good stuff. And the alternative to AngularJS is using what you'd call the old way, which is rendering everything on the server and shuffling entire HTML to the front end, right? That's kind of, when the web started out, you created your .html file, and you would essentially serve variants of that all over. So when we started building this, I actually started using a templating framework called EJS. So Node comes with a few different templating frameworks. Jade and EJS are the most common ones. And I started with that mostly because that's what I encountered when I looked around. But as I built and I started discovering the trade-offs, it became increasingly clear that Angular offered a more intuitive way of doing it. It's just more easy to reason about the app when you think of it as something that's fetching JSON back and forth. By the way, JSON, just to clarify, just to state it explicitly, is just a way of expressing data. You've heard of XML. XML is a lot more common. JSON's just a nicer way of doing it. It's more compact, and it's kind of increasingly becoming the language of the web, really, when you shuffle data across. So that's Angular. I will say, though, that if you're thinking of writing an app at this stage, Angular 2.0 is due for release in about a year. And the Angular team has promised to break everybody who's on Angular 1. Before 2. I mean, essentially, they're gutting some very core pieces of the framework constructs. They have good reasons. They're trying to, a lot of things. The landscape has changed. When Angular was created, the state of DOMs, in the web browser was pretty primitive. Things have it's advanced quite a bit, and so a lot of the stuff Angular does is no longer required. And so they're doing that, but they're doing that in a slightly, shall we say, unfriendly to the legacy way of doing it. So just something to keep in mind if you're embarking on a project and thinking of Angular. In fact, while I'm at it, I'll just tell you, there's one more framework you guys should look at, just as homework, if you will. There's React from Facebook. Angular, by the way, is created by Google. Google maintains it. It was created by someone. They acquired that place, and it's maintained by Google. React is another framework that's gaining prominence, which it's lightweight. It doesn't do so much of the MVC, but it's I've heard a lot of good things about it. I personally don't have a lot of experience with it, but you might want to check it out. Okay, so that's Angular. That's the front end. So let's talk about the. Let's move back. So Node. Node is is a JavaScript runtime we talked about. And the really interesting part about Node, what makes it special is that it uses a Chrome V8 JavaScript engine. What that means is it benefits from all the stuff that Google does to make Chrome better. And Google's bet a significant part of its business on Chrome. So consequently, Node has been improving its performance in leaps and bounds. And it's a lot better than Ruby or Python for that reason. And when you think of frameworks and languages to use, that's one thing to think about, who's backing it, because that's something that occurred to me too. Because when I started, I could have done so many different things. It was PHP, Python, Ruby, and so on. And I coalesced around Node because it was clear Google was betting big on the infrastructure for Node. And that meant it would be current. And being JavaScript, it also meant that there was a huge number of devs familiar with the environment I could tap on if I needed to get help or recruit or so on. It has an async programming model, tons of modules and frameworks. I think on GitHub, JavaScript is by far the most common language, somewhere thereabouts, or if it's not, it's very, very close. It's definitely the most active, as in the number of contributions and forks and those kinds of things. So, and they also program robots in it. So, right now you can do just about anything you want with JavaScript. So it's cool. So now you notice the two icons there. Node, when I started out, was just Node. Okay, there was Node.js created by a company called Giant. And the guy who started Node, by the way, is a guy called Ryan Dahl. He was a Giant employee, and he created this out of frustration with Ruby. And so he created Node. Node took off. And at some point, the folks working on Node were not happy with the governance model, so they created IOJS. IOJS is essentially, it's a fork of Node, fully compatible. The big difference is IOJS uses a more recent V8 runtime. So it actually uses the V8 runtime that your browser today uses, whereas Node is parked on the August 2014 version of the V8 engine. And this has a couple of implications. The first one being that that's more performant. It's just got newer stuff. There are things like new features that are coming with JavaScript keeps getting revved. So right now, ES6 is the standard that's being adopted. And Node, the default setting for Node doesn't support ES6. You got to turn on a specific flag, which also turns on some experimental features. So you get all of it, experimental and non. Whereas IOJS, they've actually got stuff like the well-baked features are turned on explicitly by default, okay, like generators. And you can turn on additional less stable features if you want. So just a thing to think about. If you're starting a project now, check out IOJS. It's essentially Node, fully compatible. And, I would start there right now because that's just, they've got a slightly better momentum going. Okay, so let's talk about, so this is Express. Now, Express is a framework that sits on Node, which makes it easier to build your app. It's, how many of you are familiar with, with frameworks in Ruby or Python, Sinatra or one of these? They've all got their things. I think it's Django and Python or, okay, not too many folks. There's some recognition here. So it's just a very simple, it's just a framework that allows you to do simple things like get a request for a certain page, route it for me, takes a lot of the boilerplate out of your lap, if you will. So to give you an example in live, this is just a small code snippet. What this does is it allows you to, when a request comes in, okay, think of a request coming into your server, you got to do a bunch of different things. Maybe you want to do authentication. Maybe you want to do compression before you send the request back out. And you want to do, you want to check the cookies. You want to extract the cookies and parse it. Express has a nice module mechanism here, as you see, the app.uses, and you can string these modules up, and you can have one module crack the cookie, another module do authentication, another module do parse the body for you, and eventually the end of it hits the router, and you get all these things done for you. So it's very extensible, and it's a neat way of building a web app. This is the stuff Express does. Okay, so I've been talking a good bit. Stop me any questions you want to get into more details anywhere. Otherwise, I'll just keep running. So MongoDB and Mongoose. So that's the backend, the database. So MongoDB is a schema-less database. It's got a lot of attributes. I'll talk about the ones that are most interesting, really, from my standpoint. It's schema-less, which means it's really a database where each row is one document. Okay, a document is just, think of a JSON object, right? It's just a grab bag of fields, of attributes, like name and John and address and some address and so on. And every document can be different. It doesn't, if you think of SQL, you kind of define a schema for your table. So you've got rows and you've got columns. And Mongo says that's okay, you don't need to have, every row can be different. And why is this interesting for a startup? Because when you start out, you really don't know what you're building. I mean, the truth is the schema evolves pretty much every week, as you do build new scenarios and stuff. But having said that, you do have a schema. Every day you have some schema. You believe you now need, say, the guy's, the travel destination. And tomorrow you might need the budget. So the schema changes, but every point you have a schema. So Mongoose is a layer. It's often called an object data mapping layer that sits on Mongo. And it allows you to enforce a schema on what is fundamentally a schema-less database. Okay, it's kind of contradictory. It's like having your cake and eating it. Okay, but that's what Mongo and Mongoose do for you. And you'll find that they're often used together. It's super common to use both together in the Node world. And so the other thing about Mongo I was talking about was it stores everything in a JSON-like format. It actually calls it BSON. It's a binary. It's compressed JSON. And this is interesting because remember, JSON is a language for data interchange now on the net. It's kind of the de facto standard. And when you translate from a SQL package to your object, your structures, you've got an impedance mismatch. You're taking something that's a grab bag of random unrelated bits and creating a JSON object. When you operate with Mongo, you get the object you need and want straight off the bat. So it's a little simpler to interrupt. And intuitive scripting shell, it's a great, very intuitive shell. This is really, I don't have a lot of database experience when I started, and I was amazed that in half an hour I had the whole thing soup to nuts. Downloaded, installed, running, created a table, was able to populate data, and that was quite surprising actually to me.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Did you consider the Google NoSQL option?
I did. I mean, so Google NoSQL, it's a cloud-based. So for the folks who aren't familiar with it, Google NoSQL is a cloud-based database, and every one of the major providers, Amazon's got Amazon DynamoDB and Azure has Azure Tables. It's a database that runs in the cloud. The reason we didn't pick it, the reason I didn't pick it was because I didn't want to be tied to a cloud provider. And you also got to think, remember, when I started, I really didn't know what I was doing, building on my laptop, and it was much easier to download this thing and run it than to set up a Google app account and so on. So, and I'll actually address your point about this thing, because there are some drawbacks to running your own MongoDB. I'll come to that in a bit, because you do have to, it's a living, breathing thing you got to take care of, right? And it gets complex as you build it. So,
the key here is to actually remain vendor neutral. And vendor neutrality is important, that you don't tie yourself with, say, one particular company. Because what happens is if Trips.com becomes a competitor to TripAdvisor.com, and then he gets millions of dollars. And I hope I'm a shareholder at that time. But at that time, what happens is if you're tied to, say, Google as a company, as a service provider, Google will immediately raise their prices. And that is not a good thing for his business and for me as a potential shareholder, right? So you want to remain vendor neutral. And that's a key principle on which Cloud Genius got rated as a vendor neutral top 10 programs compared with just about anybody. I'm just one person. Imagine that, one person, 4 years doing this on my own. And now I have a team that runs in Chicago, runs here, and and multiple other places. But vendor neutrality is key in building your business. As you start thinking, just don't put all your eggs in one basket. So don't put all your things in one cloud or one cloud provider.
There's an opposite position though that says there may be an advantage to sticking with a particular
Right.
vendor.
There can be advantage. I'm not saying it's not always the right choice, but as a startup that intends to grow, fungibility is a key characteristic. Like my dollar bill is the same thing as your dollar bill, because dollar bill is a dollar bill is a dollar bill, right? It's fungible. It's like a grain of rice is a grain of rice, unless it is basmati rice or rather Texmati rice, right? Then it becomes a problem, Monsanto or something like that. You don't want that. You want to have rice. You want to have the rice that you want every single day. And that control I want to keep when I'm building my business. And that's what he's doing. He's using Mongo open source and remain neutral.
So that's an excellent point. So let's give you an example of what it looks like to use Mongoose over Mongo. Here you can actually define a schema on what is a schema-less database really. So this is Mongoose defining a schema, creating a condition string, and you can actually instantiate objects based on the object you created around that schema, and you can do stuff like all the usual queries and so on. These queries, in fact, are awfully similar to the native Mongo queries. In fact, when you look at documentation often, if you look at the Mongoose and Mongo documentation, they're really very similar. And that's a good thing because they're similar where it makes sense to be similar, and you do get the benefits of schemas from Mongoose on a schema-less database. Okay, so let's talk about the lessons learned. Actually, at this point, I want to get to a browser. How do I do that?
Yeah, just open an Alt tab or other command tab for you.
See, I don't touch it.
You don't touch a Mac.
Touch Mac,
Let
right?
me touch it for you. So here is your triptips.com. Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, great.
Okay. All yours.
So actually, I need to do a few more things. Let me
You want to
just-
open a console or something?
Can you give me one window? There's too many tabs here.
I see. So side by side?
Yeah, can you, before I do that, can you get to scale? How do I, give me one place. Okay, this doesn't matter. Chicago. Yeah.
Okay.
So what I want to show you here is, how do I open a view source?
View source, inspect element.
And now I want to do the,
View source, view page source.
yep, this is the one. Okay, got it. Great. Awesome.
I
So,
want to make it bigger. Let me drive it.
okay, so can you go back to the first page we just showed?
The HTML. Look.
Yeah, I mean the one that customers see. So look at this one, you can make it smaller. So this is our page, by the way. Okay, this is our, it's a responsive page, Angular app, all that good stuff. Now the way search engines work, and this is by the way our trip planners for LA, the way search engines work, they take a page, they crawl it, look for content, and they're amazingly anal about tags and whatnot, which I discovered very late in the game. But they do that, okay? Now, can you go to the source I just showed you? So if you look at a single page app, an Angular app, actually make it smaller, scroll down. Yeah, so it's a little further down. If you look at, okay, this isn't super interesting, but the point is all that stuff you saw, the pictures, the content, it's not here in the HTML, it's not there. That's the sad part. So when the search engine bot hits the site, okay, and they fetch the HTML and they try and look for stuff, they'll find nothing in it. And so they'll say the site has nothing, it's crap. And that actually happened, by the way, this is all real. So what do? You've got to build a mechanism to create that HTML, okay, as if it were the old style HTML page. And so there's a way to do it. Can you go back to this thing? Yeah. Copy the URL and put it in a new browser, in a new window, or a new tab. New tab is fine.
Yeah, just pad?
No, new tab on the browser. Okay. I'll tell you why I'm doing it. Okay. Yeah, just put it in a new tab, okay? And replace it. I'll do this actually. Just replace it with a question mark.
With the
Question. Yeah, replace a bang with question mark. No. Sorry. Yeah, just a bang.
Just the bang replaced with question mark. Okay.
Well, there's more to question mark, underscore. Okay, one second. I'll end this way. Underscore. This sucks. Is there a space here? I don't know. Oh, this is bad. Switching laptops does come with a pain. So I had this thing set up and I kind of keep forgetting what the, oh shoot. Okay, last try and then I'll just go back to the talk. Let me try this. Okay, shoot. So anyway, the point I was trying to demonstrate is, can you go back to the HTML here? Yeah. Go right to the top. So if you look at the top, you see the third line, the fourth line, meta name equal to fragment, content equal to bang. That instructs the bot, the search engine bot, to come back and request the content with a very special character. I was trying to reproduce that here. It's usually a question mark underscore escape fragment equal to. And what that does is it hits our site. Okay, let me go back to the slide. And then the slide deck here.
Let me project.
Yeah, projected, yeah. Okay, so it goes back to this. So it remember, it hits the page, the regular page, looks at the little tag there, comes back with a second request. This request has the underscore escape fragment in the path. And Express has this notion of modules you plug into the path. So what happens is, pre-render is a service, and there are a few more like it. You've set that module in the path. So when it sees this URL come and it takes that thing, calls out to the pre-render server, and gets the static HTML page, okay, which I can't show you because somehow I'm screwing up the URL, and presents it back to the search engine. So the search engine then has what you'd call an old-style web page for this web app. And that is critical to indexing our content, because we were not being indexed correctly. And there are alternatives to using the pre-render service. You can actually run the same. Those people are nice enough to actually open source their code. So you can actually run your own pre-render server, which we did for a bit. It comes with some nice convenience functions like metrics and reporting and so on, which made it worth our while to use their service. But you can play with it. So that's the first thing we learned. Single page apps have a problem with indexing. You've got to do extra work. And over and above this part, when I started out this thing, I naively assumed that if I made a page that looked good to the viewer, it looked good to the search engine. That's not the case, because I mean they care like crazy about having the H1 tags and the H2 tags and the hierarchy, and it's crazy. I mean, I just thought if you can always do the math with CSS and figure out what's the most prominent element on a page. You shouldn't need to put tags anymore, but that's the way it is.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that you've created predefined queries that the service will return to the web crawler, and those will be used for the index access, right?
Right. So what happens is pre-render to the service, and we say, please index our stuff. Okay. So they kind of keep hitting our page and generating these static HTML pages.
Okay.
Now, when the bot comes in and says with that that weird escape fragment stuff, our module tracks it, calls out to the pre-render service, fetches the static page, and shovels it back. Okay. It's a sleight of hand there. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So hyperactive search. Yeah, go ahead.
Does it pre-render like every page of your website?
Pretty much every page. Every page you care about from the search engine standpoint, it does it. So hyperactive search bots. This is interesting. So it's a classic URL from our site. It's what it says is there's a tour in Hawaii. Okay. Now the way we built our app, we index all our tours based on the tour ID there. So 2360 M2 is a tour for a specific tour, ID for a specific tour, and a user would only get to that if they were looking at Oahu and they looked at tours and they finally hit that and we show them the content. That's the only way a user can get to it. Now the Google bot is kind of creative, okay, in a malicious, mean way. What it does, it takes that code, okay, and applies every other place. So we had no safeguards, so it would apply Seattle, San Francisco, LA, and 12 other places. And so we'd have the same tour indexed under those 12 places, which is kind of crazy. So the net effect was when we look for, say, tours on TripTips, for Seattle, you'd find things in Hawaii and LA, and it really made us look terrible. So we had to explicitly do checks to make sure that the whole string being passed in by the whoever came to our site was legit. And we had 404s which said page doesn't exist. What do you see out there, by the way, this graph? Is it large enough? The key point is at the very top, it's 4,500. At the bottom, it's about 1,500. That's from our index activity on our site. So that's the Google bot, and they indexed 4,500 URLs, way back in November. Okay, we only have about like 1,200 URLs valid. So the rest was a bot being creative, and there's no great way to train the bot, as I can tell, except from having the 404s and you can explicitly go do deletions, but there's no programmatic way to do it with Google. So you can't really delete manually like 3,000 URLs. It takes forever. So that's that. Third-party libraries. So Node is a very popular environment. Lots of libraries. Okay, very extensible. JavaScript is super popular. Lots of libraries. Great stuff. The flip side of that is the libraries come in questionable quality. Okay, so when it's shipped by Google or Amazon or Mailgun or whatever, there's some quality behind it. But the other stuff you got to look a little carefully. We had cases where we used Request.js. It's a very popular library for crafting REST requests. If you use a stock Node library, it's got you might write about 20 lines of code. It's like you specify the URL, you do a call, you get a callback, and you've got callbacks for multiple events. So the first is an on event when you get the first response, then chunks, and then the end. And so you got to do some write-up code to concatenate chunks and so on. When I started, I thought this is too much work. I mean, I don't want to write. I don't write any code I don't need to write. So I use a library. As it turned out, when I queried Living Social, I wouldn't get the data because there was some little minor glitch somewhere, which I didn't bother debugging really, because I just rewrote the same code using the core library. It worked just fine. And then later I encountered this with Bing too. So the learning I got from that was, if it's not a humongous amount of code, stick to the core library, write your own code, because the core libraries, the modules often come with a lot of other stuff. They're like Swiss Army knives, and when something goes wrong, debugging is a pain, and so you got to just weigh the trade-off. The other thing to look for is look for multiple contributors in a library and look for activity. Try and see a sustained period of activity over, say, a year, and at least 3 or 4 contributors. If it's one guy who did a whole bunch of check-ins like 18 months ago and never showed up again, stay away from that. Okay, prepackaged images. This is a bit like the library thing. So our stack uses Mean, right? The Mongo, Express, Angular, Node stack. You get a lot of images out there, like AMIs on Amazon, for example, that use that bundle all these things in one image. It's tempting to use it. In fact, I started out using that. There's a company called Bitnami does it. Anyone here work at Bitnami? Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, so Bitnami, so I use a Bitnami image, and it's got the stuff on it. The challenge really is with supportability. For example, I had a very simple use case. I wanted to use Upstart to start the service every time the image is restarted. Now that didn't work, and I'm sure there are ways to make it work, but I went to the forums, couldn't get an answer, and I probably spent the equivalent of maybe a day. There were 2 issues. This and trying to create a new user and give that guy separate SSH keys and the ability to run the service. So Bitnami images come with the stock Bitnami user. I did all the change owner, change group, give permissions, all the good stuff. Didn't work. Anyway, long story short, I took I created my own image from scratch, and where I was stuck, I got answers very quickly on Stack Overflow. The challenge with the Bitnami or any, I'm not picking on you by the way, but any specific vendor image is that if Stack Overflow has say 20 great devs for the mean stack, the number of great devs for the mean stack on Bitnami on Stack Overflow is probably close to 0. So you got a support problem there. You don't really have the same access to the same level of information and help. So the same thing again. If you and today I think you'll probably, if you start today, you'll use Yeoman, and there are a few other nice tools to build these things. You're better off there than that's one learning I've had.
So the key here is to build from what I call JEOS. Have you heard the word JEOS before? JEOS. Just enough operating system. Heard of it before? What you do is take a minimal bare bones from the operating system vendor. Like take the mini.iso from Ubuntu, or take Server Core from Microsoft. Put that on a machine in the cloud, and then build everything up from there up. So add only what you need, nothing else. Just enough OS. Not bashing Bitnami. I have used Bitnami, by the way, thank you. But the problem is Bitnami makes products for their customers. I may not be their customer. So I want to build my application and my images for my customers, which means I need to know what am I putting on my JEOS. And so build it up, and completely, like he said, Yeoman, YEOMAN, a beautiful tool for making and building mean apps. And another one called Grunt.js. You can use these tools to build out mean applications. And even underneath that, you can use tools like Chef, Puppet, Ansible to build out your entire stack and orchestrate the whole service for your customers. And that's what I recommend, and I use that. And I take that as a content that we teach here in this curriculum that we run here in Lake Washington and in Chicago.
Right, that's a great point, really. Simplicity always helps. And whenever you take something off the shelf, you got to just think of the baggage that comes with it. Like sometimes, Bitnami is a fine scenario, right? Apache comes by default, which is great. But if you don't want Apache, you have to go through quite a amount of pain to actually turn it off, because it grabs port 80, and then your Node app starts up and suddenly port 80 is swallowed. So little details like that kind of add up. So start with the bare minimum where you can, and then go from there. Okay, so this is storing creds in the environment. Now, when you run your stuff, you'll be running it in multiple places on your desktop, maybe in a test environment, the cloud, production. And each of these environments, you'll possibly be accessing a different set of databases. You certainly need to keep your keys safe, because you don't want to have your production keys in your build. It's just not good hygiene. You might be hiring vendors, contractors, all kinds of things, and you want to keep those boundaries so you can secure your customer data and so on. Amazon has a great way to do it, and I call it out here because it's one of the less obvious things around. You'll see the IAM documentation is very extensive, but I didn't quite find it in the way I was looking for. Like, how do I store my config securely? I had to kind of build it out of. Actually, came out quite by accident because I was doing other stuff with IAM and I discovered it. But in a nutshell, you can take the identity and access management story to build, to create roles which can, with permissions to access your stuff in S3. So you can create a role which has the permissions to read an S3 bucket, and you can then stash your creds in that bucket. And the beauty of it is that role can be assigned to only a VM or an Elastic Beanstalk app. It can't be, nobody can hijack it. And so only that app or that VM can go grab that bucket or that blob, get your database keys, and start accessing your stuff. So it's a very interesting model. Here's a quick example of how you go about doing it. And again, this is documented. If you know what to look for, you'll find it. AWS is very well documented, but the specific use case is a little less obvious. So you set a role type, pick the EC2 one. You can you pick a policy type. You can create your own custom policy here. You can say read only certain buckets, whatever, and so on. And then finally, when so after you've created the role instance, right, you can assign that role to your Elastic Beanstalk app or to your instance before you deploy it. And that's what links the magic. So you don't explicitly assign the keys to access the bucket, you just access a role. And the beauty of it is that the keys are automatically rotated. So you don't need to think about, hey, those keys are getting old. The environment keeps the keys updated so that at any given point, the role has 2 keys, okay? And when before the old key expires, the role is updated with a new key so that it sort of beautifully keeps going. It's really magic when you have to use it.
Yeah, it is like showering and changing every day. Conceptually the same thing, right? Security is like changing your undergarments. Changing your keys, same thing. Systematically, companies do that, rotate your keys, and that's what he's showing an example of.
Right, and it's done. It's doing it yourself. Building the infra is really hard. I mean, it takes a fair amount of work, and it's a nice way to get that out of the way. So that's IAM for you. So other stuff that, general, and really there's a lot of stuff that came out of the experience of building it. I'm just touching on the high level ones. The linkage between all these libraries can be fragile. Just be careful when you upgrade. Like test the crap out of it, really. Every page, there are Bootstrap can Angular can mess with Bootstrap's tabs, and it can mess with this, and you got to be careful about it. My partner who did most of the front end, he's not here, so otherwise he'll tell you a lot of war stories on how things went bad with various things. JSON, I showed you the architecture of the app. If you think about it, our databases, or rather the servers we run, they basically they send you the single page app in the beginning, and then they keep sending you JSON for all kinds of things, tours, deals, and so on. If you had to try and want to play with scale, for example, we could well take the JSON and put it on a CDN, because this is a JSON file, and offload that from the server. So that's an idea. That's something we've thought about. Scale isn't a problem really. We've got bigger fish to fry, but if we ever did, that's something we do. So, coming back to the earlier discussion around how do you have your cake and eat it, we talked about using NoSQL, Google's NoSQL table or DynamoDB as your story. But then, as Nilesh mentioned, how do you stay vendor agnostic? So, since I think as of the last year or something, Postgres now has a document database option, which means they essentially give you JSON back in some form. And the reason it's interesting is because some cloud providers, Amazon notably, has a RDS, this managed relational database service. What that means is you can run Postgres on your system, okay, on your desktop, the same query language. Then if you want to scale, or you get so big that you want to spread across multiple front ends, and you want to have your backend be fault tolerant and capable of scaling out, you can use the Amazon RDS service and get the benefit of not being locked into it, because it's Postgres in the end. If you ever get really big, you can run your own Postgres cluster anywhere else on Azure or Google. But during the period when you're too big for a single node and too small for running your own cluster, you can use a managed service like this. And by the way, on a related note, there are Mongo vendors who provide a similar service. And the reason I didn't go with them is because this, by the way, is about a couple years old when I did the evaluations, but these guys didn't support some key features like authentication across multiple databases. So you think about it, I've got 12 databases. The approach is for every database I create one user, okay? And when I hit the database, I authenticate using that user account, which is a pain because I've already got 3 accounts and 12 databases, that's 36 accounts to manage. Now Mongo supports the notion of having an admin DB, so you can create 5, 6 users, whatever, and you can, when you hit any other database, you can say authenticate against that admin DB. So that way you're only rotating stuff in one database. Now, the cloud providers didn't support it. They all had the notion of you needed to create an account for each database. So that's one reason I didn't go with that. And so other things like, this is probably semi-obvious, but I'll call it out because I actually tripped on it. Try and keep your images and your collateral in one place, because when you look at a web request, right, it's very interesting. Let me skip to this actually, because this is useful. You look at this. This is a snapshot of an analysis of a small piece of our website being loaded. You look at this. This is the that purple and the blue you see. It's actually the DNS request and the connect. If you notice, and you don't have the numbers there, but it's about 70 milliseconds each, which is kind of painful, and it can expand even more. But if you look at that graph there, you'll notice that all those yellow blobs don't have the blue and the red, blue and the purple, because the browser has already done the DNS lookup for those packages, and it can make a big difference for you. I mean, when I was working on the perf of the site, this was quite a big deal. So we actually spent some time aggregating and putting stuff in. We were even using inconsistent DNS names for the same Azure blob. AWS. You actually got the ability to create multiple prefixes to access your stuff, and each of them is a different DNS lookup. So, whoops. So how do I get back there? Okay, so the other stuff I want to talk about was the resources. This is an incomplete list of resources, but just the stuff that jumped out at me. The first site is interesting because when you're looking at modules, and you will look at modules, you'll be wondering which ones should I use, which ones being most common, and so on. And that's a useful site because they actually rate the modules in terms of currency. You know, how many were, which ones used or downloaded most often, which is often a good metric. Like when I buy on Amazon, I often look at the best-selling something, so I don't need to do too much research myself. It's coarse, but you can kind of use that as a first approximation when you're making decisions. So that's the Node Modules site. Stack Overflow, it's, I don't know how we live without it, frankly. I mean, it's, seriously, stuff wouldn't, I mean, there's stuff you just cannot do without it. Site speed measurement, tools.pingdom. This is a very interesting site. I just showed you the screenshot of it. It does a lot of good stuff like assessing your site and giving you a health check. So you look at the site here, you get a nice little, it's a nice feeling, right? 91 on 100, performance grade and all that stuff. Like you're back in school. But it's actually quite good because when you're trying to debug your site and look at where you're breaking, I could do a whole talk on the perf issues we found when we first launched. The naive launch was like just terrible, not awful really. So, and they also have a service that allows you to, that will hit your site. It's like a runner, you know, like Azure Storage and all the big services have their own runners. They keep hitting their own endpoints to see if they're working, and they'll fire alarms. This site gives you the ability to do a similar lower cost version of it. It'll hit your site periodically, and you can train it to do things for you, like send an email or whatever, escalate in some ways. Yep, so that's all I really had. Any questions on the content so far? Yeah.
You build an API for TripTip.
I don't have an API for TripTips.
So if you are planning to have a mobile app for Android or iPad app for iPhone, how do you do it?
Okay, so great point. Actually, let me correct my answer. We do have an API. It's not a published API. So the way we are built, let me go back to the wow, okay, here. So if you go back to this picture, right, every query that comes into the VM is actually it's an API. It's really, when you first hit triptips.com, you're actually downloading this whole single page app. Okay, it's a whole bundle of JavaScript, HTML, CSS. And then it sits in your browser and it's making REST calls all the time to that thing. And that's really our API. So I can query my deals, I can query tours, I can query all kinds of stuff. I just don't have an auth mechanism to say it's, to give accounts and say you can do stuff. Actually, as a matter of fact, we have a test running with another startup who needs some of our content. So we said, hey, just take it, here's our API, and we're no charging nothing, just they're querying our stuff and getting our guides and our tours. And that's how we do it.
One more question.
Shoot.
How do you import data from Groupon, Bing, Social?
They have an API. So these guys have an API. We are affiliate partners with them. We query, we can filter, we can do stuff. Yeah.
How many dev hours do you need to build your website?
Come again?
How many dev hours? How many developing hours you need for that?
How many what? Sorry, I missed
Man
that.
hours.
How many man hours? I don't know really. So I'll give you honestly, we didn't count, but it's like we started about in end of August 2013. We kind of got out in some shape or form in around August of 2014. We did a lot of corrections. This largely, so the team is really, I'm the full-timer. My co-founder was working part-time. We had a couple interns at various points. So it's very hard to come up with a precise answer because it depends on which person's man hours you're talking about too. Yeah.
In choosing your concierges and finding them, how did you build that part of your business?
So that's an interesting one. That's actually the most interesting part of the outside of this, which is I just set out to find people on TripAdvisor, great people who have done well-reviewed and so on. And so we've got a couple of models. We picked people on TripAdvisor who got a good reputation conducting tours. That's one. The other way is we actually advertise in places like Craigslist on creative gigs. We have people send us a writing sample of 350 words describing how they plan a tour for somebody for 2 days. And then we interview them. So everybody gets interviewed. Where we ask them what we interview really for three things. It's knowledge, passion, and communication skill. That's it. And so we do that, and then people get onboarded.
So these people are not necessarily in the tour business now, or does it make any difference?
Well, some of them are, and some of them aren't. So the interesting thing is we've got folks who are like this. We have a lady who's a exec assistant for her boss, and she does a lot of tour planning for her boss's visitors, and she just does it. She knows she does it all the time. She's not really a travel professional per se, but she knows the city better than anyone else does.
Right. Yeah. No. Every time I hear this idea, and I've heard other people trying to do it, it's vetting the people who you're sending your clients to who you've never met, and that always makes me a little.
It is, and so by the way, just so you guys know, this is the business end of things. There's a money back guarantee. Don't like it, money back. It's the Amazon model. No questions asked. You go through the trip, come back and say this advice was just god awful, irrelevant. You get your money back. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you started developing the code first in your laptop, and then you scaled it up to a company, right?
Yeah.
And then you mentioned all these libraries you use. I'm curious, how do you ensure code quality? Like, how do you scale your test classes? And how do you just maintain the code?
It's really hard, but frankly, it's code reviews. It's largely code reviews and a lot of testing. We don't have a great test story. It's a lot of, we emit logs and it's a more ad hoc part of our processes. We actually log and we have scripts that copy our logs in, and we do some queries to see whether we've been firing certain warnings, exceptions, and so on. It's not we are not at Microsoft standards, frankly, on those angles. It's mostly code review and manual testing to a large part.
There are other startups that do things differently than what Microsoft would do. For example, and the method that you may have heard of is called test-driven development. Heard of it? Like first thing you do is you write the test, and then what happens after you run the test? all of them fail, right? Because you don't have a product yet. And then you slowly build one feature at a time, one failure at a time, and convert that failure into a pass. And then the item becomes green. And then you keep testing all the time. Like continuous testing is how you build a product these days. The first thing you do is before you write a specification, you actually write a test. That represents your specification. And then you have everything failing to begin with, which is beautiful. Because at the end of the game, you want these tests to be continuously running, and you have everything passing, and all along it was automatically tested. That's the way to operate. That's how most new modern startups, different from Microsoft, operate like that. TDD.
And so there are a lot of test frameworks. And realistically, if you were to get into trying to do your launch your concept, for example, the engineering is important, but get to a good enough stage. I think this Zuckerberg, somebody said this. If you're not embarrassed by your first rev, you've been waiting too long or something. The point is, when you're dealing with the users in the hundreds and so on, it's okay, the odd failure, thousands. Test the concept, and you can sort of get going from there. Yeah.
So a few questions. One is for you, on the right, these three boxes, some of them are data sources, right?
Yeah. So Groupon, Bing, Google, White, those are the people we get stuff from.
Okay. So you get the data through API?
Yeah, it's all APIs.
Right. No scraping.
No scraping. That's the beauty of this world. I mean, quite honestly, you couldn't have done this like, say, 20 years ago. You had to somebody go saying all this. I don't know how you could even do it. I mean, just not a team of 1.5 isn't going to do it, really.
Can you talk about TripAdvisor?
Yeah.
Is that a data source too?
TripAdvisor is not here. We actually negotiated with them. They were asking way too much money, frankly, for the content we were getting.
Okay. So any of those are free or APIs? Did you have to pay them?
We actually managed to stay almost free. Bing has a fairly low threshold, but because we cache, there are scenarios. So a lot of these APIs are built on the model that you're querying every single time. Okay, so user hits a site, you go fetch, and then next user fetch again. What we do actually, we cache. So every night we go fetch data from all these sources, and we catalog and cleanse, and we do a little more work because we need to categorize and cleanse from extraneous stuff. And that way we actually hit our caches most of the time.
Okay, so that does sound like a little in between scraping and API, right?
Well, so what you might argue here is, are you getting the most precious deals? Now, because let's say like Living Social, for example, we refresh every night, okay? Now the odds of a new deal happening during the day are really low. And I looked at this, I've done this like on a very unscientific manual test, but fairly exhaustive, I'd say. And there isn't much change day to day. So you're not missing anything. What that gives us is the luxury of doing some very cool categorization to present it in a nicer way to the user, because these guys don't necessarily, Groupon and Living Social don't even have the same means of categorizing stuff, right? So we've got to invent our own taxonomy, and we need to then, even the cleansing, we use a lot of wildcards, regex, all that good stuff. And they don't work on each, so it's just.
So you have a parser, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a little, we call it our deal client. It's basically going every night, fetching a lot of deals, doing a lot of cleansing, parsing, all that stuff. Yeah.
But through their API, you get the data.
Yeah, through the API.
Database.
Yeah, we are a legitimate partner. We've got, we get affiliate commissions, all the good stuff. We are part of their business. Yeah.
So commissions are your revenue source.
Yeah, the business model. So we have 3 pillars, actually 4 pillars. We have when you book a trip, plan a trip, we get a cut of the booking fee. Tours and deals, we get affiliate revenue, and we also have the ability to go do it. So if you like the advice you've been given, you can say just go make it happen, and we can do that. That's not in-house, by the way. We actually partner with a travel firm, and what we do is we keep the cost out for the customer. The customer doesn't pay a dime to get that extra service, and the travel company is willing to do it because they can break even on it. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't really get all into the model. So the first one, you have some travel experts there, right?
Yeah.
You say that you pay like $55 for advice or something, or what is it?
Yeah, so you get for a price of, actually, can I go back to the site? Sorry, okay, I feel
You feel the Mac pain?
a Mac pain. We're going into the Mac. I'm just going to show you the, okay, so you take a look at these folks here. These guys name their prices. And what that 58 bucks is saying is Bob will charge you 58 bucks to plan a trip, a week-long trip to LA. Okay, and then what you get for the week-long trip in the FAQ section is actually it's a complete itinerary of here's a recommended place to live, here's a few places to eat, here's what you should do to dodge traffic, all that stuff. When you book with Bob, you'll actually answer a few questions like your budget, what are you interested in, who are you traveling, wife, kids, how old are they, all those things. Then Bob takes that stuff and creates a Lonely Planet customized for your trip. That's the model here.
And that's based on you. Do you get a payment and then you pay them on the back?
Correct. Yes, we pay, and so that's where Stripe comes in. We don't keep any PII stuff here. No credit card information. We connect to Stripe. You pay Stripe. Stripe cuts us a check, and then we cut Bob a check. That's how it works.
What about booking?
Yeah, same thing.
Booking is your own engine, or?
So we don't have the booking engine is more. It's a little more like an email. The customer sends it. We haven't. There isn't the classic Expedia style booking. It's done with an email.
So you don't do the airline or the hotel or car or any auto rental or anything?
So we can do it. What happens is if the customer says, "Hey, I like it, just make it happen,"
right.
We'll do it. As in, there's actually we hand it off to a travel agent who does it,
Right. Okay.
and because they work for us, they will not charge the customer for typically airline bookings is $25 fee. They won't do that. Yeah.
The guide, they might not be the professionals, so they're unknown people. When you send them tourists, has there been any safety concerns?
Oh, so okay, great question. So by the way, I would emphasize they never meet. Okay, it's all the communication is entirely electronic. So if you were to click a book, you would be asked a questionnaire. You fill the questionnaire. Bob gets it. Bob looks at it and says, "Okay, here's what I recommend." And it's a pretty detailed trip plan, trip itinerary. Gets to your email. You like it. You can ask him questions. You can have a Skype call with him. But you don't meet him.
So there won't be any guided tour?
We have guided tours. So those tours come from places like, whoops, for the Max, okay. Yeah, so these are from our, this is from Viator actually. We've got an aggregator. We've got actually multiple sources. Viator is our largest one. These are all folks who are licensed, bonded, certified, ruled by the state. We don't have a personal relationship with them for the most part. A few of them we do, but the rest, in which case we're kind of acting as their booking engine, if you will. But these are folks who are effectively being, they're somebody else's agent, if you will. Like if you were to go to TripAdvisor and book some, kayaking or something, that's what you'll be doing.
So if the guide is not professional, he cannot be a guide with you.
Yeah, and to be very clear, what we do, the way we get these tours is we look at the ratings and we eliminate anything that's below a 3-star. So we actually, we look at the inventory of tours and we eliminate the ones that are lower rated, and that's how we show them.
So have you faced any legal issues or something in the beginning? Or?
No, nothing really. Yeah, we are not in fact, in this scenario, the money doesn't even hit us, by the way. In this scenario, the money hits our aggregator and they cut us a check. So we are almost like the way you post an Amazon booking button, buy button. That's what we are effectively doing here.
It doesn't sound like you're a travel agent per se at all. So you don't.
We're not. We're in the business of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so you're not covered by. There are very strict laws about that, but you don't have to worry.
Yeah, we don't. Our people do not take anyone around. We do not actually give advice ourselves. It's all very
So how do you build this, like, see your social, like, plugins, and you also have the rating reviews?
Yeah.
Do you use, like, Wikia for your social plugins and the Pata Voice for your rating, or you do this stuff on your own?
I missed that. So you said social plugins. Can you tell me one more time?
Yes, social plugins, is that stuff you build on your own, or use some third-party APIs like Wikia?
Oh, these are the classic, like me, tweet me kind of stuff. You know, if you go to any site, you'll have a thing to do stuff. That's what we've done. All these guys had their own share buttons. We didn't quite like them, so we've taken PNG. And you see some sites have done it. They've actually taken their own, rolled their own logos because they don't fit very well in the flow. We did that here.
Can you just click on one? Because it should just like pop,
It should-
click on the
It
Twitter one.
should take you to the amazing Los Angeles race Facebook page if you click the.
No. This actually is for you to tweet. You have to have a tweet.
Like it face.
Yeah.
Little free advertising.
Correct. Yeah. The whole idea is for So for example, if you were to say book Bob's service, you like him, you'd sort of like him on your Facebook page and get the word out. That's the idea.
Do you currently have a recommendation engine building, or?
Yeah. So we're doing a few different things. This is we're building a freemium service. We're building a model where you can. If you look at it right now, you pretty much have to pay to do something here. You got to book a trip plan or book a tour or something. So we're building a medium where you can sort of plan your trips. And in fact, if you're interested, I'm happy to drop you a line when you've got that service ready. We'll send you. You can play with it, and it's totally free. You can just have fun with it. In fact, just I'll stick around. Give me your email address. I'll send you an update when we are done with that.
Come back to your choice on Mongo. So from what I learned, Mongo is pretty good at writing a large amount of data, but the read performance is not as good as Cassandra. So from your experience, how big is your volume of storage, and have you seen any performance issues with reading?
We don't really have any read. And the truth is, our data sets are not massive. So remember, our workflow is really, we get our data, once a day. Okay, fetch deals, all that stuff. Then it's sitting there pretty much. The user activity is slightly different. Tours and the user's planning his trip, and you get that little nibble now. The byte written there, a byte written there. That's about it. There's no massive data crunching. We do the cleansing, but again, once a day, and we time it so it happens in the wee hours of the night when the world is quiet, kind of thing. The rest of the day, it's fairly quiet, so we don't have that problem. And Mongo uses system memory where it can. So after you pick the system a little bit, it's all paged into memory. You're not reading from disk much more. So we are under a gig, our entire data set, really. So we are comfortable, really. We're not data intensive, if that's the thinking.
You guys update the database at all? Or do you just rewrite? Like if the user asks for another additional information, do you update the existing database row, or do you just delete the user and have a new one?
Sorry, when the user updates what again?
So let's say you have a user information in your database.
Yeah.
The user updates some information.
Yeah, like changes his email address, something. Yeah, we'll update in place. I mean, it's actually Mongo does it for us. I mean, you'll have a Mongo query that says find one and update. And yeah, actually, I'm not. How the engine does it, I'm not totally sure on, but because you can have journals and you can roll journals and stuff. Don't know, but for us, it's like an in-place update.
Roughly, how many human trip planners are there available today?
We have 60 trip planners.
60 trip planners?
Yeah, across 12 destinations.
12.
Yeah.
So what is the percentage of commission fee you're charging them?
So that's kind of in the business part, slightly confidential. But if you're interested in being a trip planner, write it to me and we can figure out something that works.
I'll get a 2-star. Yeah.
Come again?
I'll get a 2-star. That's a problem.
No, don't sell yourself short, really. Like I said, the trip planners are not people who are travel professionals. They're really people like you and me. We all travel, we all plan our trips. And some of us do it more, and some of us do less, and the folks who do it more are often great candidates. Yeah.
Question. So when a trip planner is supposed to do this, how long is there a certain time frame that they have to do this trip plan for them, like the actual documentation? Is there?
Yeah. So there is
full-time job, right?
Correct. So the SLA is within 24 hours. Ideally, as soon as possible, it will respond to the customer and say, "Hey, I'm on it," and they'll ask additional questions. And then within 48 hours, they'll give you a trip plan. You know, the full super nuts thing. And then you can ask them more questions about, "Hey, what if I didn't do this and did that," and so on. Yeah.
So, do you take the responsibility of what these trip planners give the itinerary, or is it just you're just providing a marketplace for the?
We're providing a marketplace, but having said that, we actually enforce standards. We have a certain. If you go to the FAQ, actually, I might as well just get here since it's there. And the reason I do this is, so we have a certain set of. So we have a specific minimum amount of information. We encourage trip planners to innovate and provide stuff like, say, if in Hawaii, the weather is more important than the traffic, you know, in terms of information. So we encourage people to go above and beyond, but there is a minimum amount of data they have to provide, which is roughly what you see here in that style. You know, so it's kind of, it starts from the super general, like, how do you book your flights? This might be obvious to you and me, but, you know, imagine if you were coming from, say, Shanghai or Delhi. It's a different set of sites over there, right? Expedia is not necessarily the obvious choice. How do you find local transit? And then you can get into very specifics. How do you get around town and so on? Yeah.
I'm going to get too specific if your business model.
Sure.
What sort of customer volume makes this viable?
What kind of customer volume makes it viable?
Like you know, are we talking 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people? Like, at what point is this truly viable?
Right, and so so that's a good question, and depends on the monetization also, because as you know, we've got 3 pillars, right?
Yes.
The deal. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, never mind. So,
if you don't want to answer, that's okay too. I realize it's
in the.
I'm just curious about what size, ballpark, order of magnitude.
Are you looking to invest? I mean, I'm happy to.
It's okay.
Sorry. Let me just. No, it's a long story, but I've actually got Google Voice, and so it rings 2 different dialers on my phone. If you have an Android device and you have Google Voice, you've probably seen this happen.
I should say one of the reasons I was asking.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out at what point are you going to cross the threshold for some of your initial decisions.
Right.
Technical decisions won't hold up any longer. So the choice to manage your own database,
right,
as opposed to letting someone else manage it for you, things like that. That's sort of what I was trying to really.
Okay, got it. No, great question. So if you're getting at that, the database choice, we actually have a good out, which is, so we actually have a second deployment topology, which is Elastic Beanstalk. It's a scale-out one. We've got it in DynamoDB. But having said that, what we would really do is stash our stuff in JSON on S3, because then you have the benefit of a CDN, okay? And you know, we can literally follow our customers. Every night we'll stash new stuff in the CDN, just goes out. And that makes the stuff that we run really thin. All it takes is when you create an account or you change your trip plans, you know, you send a few bytes of data, that's all we care about. In fact, you can also think about stashing the whole Angular app somewhere in a CDN. It's just a blob of JSON, I mean, of HTML and so on. Yeah.
So you said that the person who planned the trip and the people who booked the trip can talk. So do you provide the environment to talk, or do they just share emails and talk outside? So
the requirement is that these guys have Skype and Hangouts, Google Hangouts, so it's all free. So of course, they have a telephone number too, but the idea is that, you know, if you're international travelers, you just kind of talk
that way. You don't talk through the site.
You don't talk to the site. So actually, that's part of, we're building up. You've probably seen Meetup and lots of Craigslist, for example, where the messaging goes through us. We're building that. We don't have that right now. But even more for the verbal stuff, where you can actually talk to the other person, voice conferencing, we won't get into business. We just have people talk directly. It's fairly safe because they don't meet in person, so we're not worried about somebody pulling a gun and stuff.
And in the decision between like using your own Mongo versus taking a Mongo as a service, I think that's a very easy decision to make. If you are looking at, say, Mongo Labs or other hosted database service providers, it's very easy, like $15, and you outsource it with them. You don't have to worry about your Mongo, as long as it is Mongo, as long as it is open source, as long as you can take it away from Mongo Lab and give it to Mongo HQ. I don't care.
So
probably he doesn't also.
Right, actually, no, so just to answer, that's a great point, but just one thing, as I mentioned earlier on, when I started looking at this and I looked at third-party services, Mongo hosting isn't at the same cost ratio as, say, the RDS service for Postgres, and I've always wanted AWS to support, Mongo, because when these guys run, the way they do that, they run it on literally VMs, and they're paying those costs, and they don't necessarily have the same loads. I worked on Azure storage, by the way, that's my background. And so I know how Azure Tables is built. It's insanely efficient in the way it uses storage, which is why you get some really cheap prices. But when you start running on a VM, you can't hit those price points. So in this case, you can think of using, say, Postgres, the NoSQL version of the document database version of Postgres, potentially, because they've got Amazon AWS now has RDS that supports this version. So I haven't looked at it myself, but you can probably investigate this and see it. But that's a great point, really. The other thing with these third-party services, again, part of the due diligence is check and see they have the functionality you need. When I did it, they didn't, but that'll change.
Can you go to the whole page?
Sure. How the heck do I do that? Where is the back button? Okay, what the heck?
There is no back.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There are two fingers this way, that way. Is the
Okay.
There's no back button.
No back. It is supposed to be a back button.
Okay, yeah, sorry, what were you saying?
The image are stored in S3, right?
Yeah.
And database is your own database.
Yep.
So I have a quick announcement to make.
And where do you store your Node.js web server?
Actually, let me finish it.
A quick plug. I have a special offer for $200 of gift card Amazon if you refer somebody to join one of my courses here in Redmond, in Chicago, and other places, also online. Email me if you want details. If the person you refer signs up, 200 AWS, not AWS, Amazon.com gift card. AWS is not mine.
Actually,
regular retail gift card.
Nilesh, how do I create? I just want to leave my email address somewhere here, because I mentioned a few things. We were the free service we're building. Anyone's interested, shoot me an email, and I'll send you a. I just want to give my
And your email address is Dinesh
at triptips.com.
Triptips.com.
Yeah, so just write me if you want to look at the free version, and I'll send it to you when you're ready. You always welcome community feedback.
The free version is still limited to the areas you guys are supporting right now, or is that kind of expanding to the?
So the free version will be slightly wider. What it'll do in a nutshell, help you plan your trip. Imagine Imagine having a little map interface where you can play around with stuff.
Right.
We all do it when we plan our trips, right? You write somewhere, you go write what you do, and so on. We're going to do that online, and because it doesn't require human beings at each place, we will. It'll be cover a wider geography than we have here.
Okay.
Question.
Sure.
So,
You can ask more. No hurry.
how did you guys start? Like, what was the first marketing strategy, or how did you get your customers and clients? How did you start?
It's various channels, really. It's Facebook. By the way, I'll be honest, we don't have as many customers as we like to have. We're a startup, we're growing, right?
Can we roughly get a number, like how many trips?
Oh, the numbers come when you decide to invest in us. No, but seriously, we've got a few hundred users and stuff, but it's the way people get to us is they get to us through things like Facebook or those kinds of, it's just actually Facebook's a big one really. A lot of it is we've had some articles published in a few places. That's about it. Anything else?
I think my question was where do you how do you deploy a Node.js? You deploy on your own server? Or?
So we've got two topologies. One is a VM in Amazon. We have actually got scripts. This part is a little scripted. We use Bitbucket to post our code, our repositories, and we've got a script that hits our deployed VM and sucks it down from there. It's a Git repo with read-only permission with the Git key. And in the EBS version, it's very similar. If you use EBS, it's EBS. It's AWS.push, and you kind of push it out to an S3 bucket, which EBS takes and then deploys across the farm of machines. Yep.
Do you have any issues with Node.js performance on UI?
Node.js performance issues. Sorry, did you say Angular?
Yes.
Angular, yeah. So, the Angular, when you look at the tools, if you go back to if you look at the stuff on, how do I get to the browser? Okay. So, oops, what did I click?
Let me try.
Okay.
You talk.
No, okay. So there's a certain scenario. You look at the tours and deals. There's a couple of ways you can build Angular apps. Okay, when you want to hide something, you can do there's an ng show, ng hide. When you do a show and hide, it's part of the DOM. And when you're trying to enumerate the entire DOM, and we can have thousands of these, you do see a bit of a slowness creep in. But when you do the ngIfs make it not part of the DOM. It's actually quite performant. But the short answer to your question is, we do okay because we've made a few choices around UI and how we style it. So, for example, you only show 20 at a time. So when you scroll, you'll say show more. So we are fine.
Also, you customize the stuff by self, or you use some library as Angular stuff, or
yeah. So actually, it's a good question there. Angular Strap and Angular UI. And this is where I wish my partner were here because we evaluated both, and I think we use Angular UI, and we had some amount of pain in the process. I forget all these tabs and they're kind of a little fragile, as I recall, when we switch between these two libraries, which is why we're kind of scared to upgrade also because it just means a whole bunch of testing and stuff to do. Yeah.
What's your testing framework?
What's our test? We don't have we've got a test framework we built in Karma for the front end, but it's not really operational at this point. So it's a lot of ad hoc manual testing, frankly, at this point. This is also why we need a lot of beta testers, in case you haven't figured it out. Feel free to write out to me.
So how many cities are you in now?
12.
And where do you want to go next? Says the traveler in me.
Oh, the world over. Actually, so here's the thing. And by the way, we're looking for community participation. If you're kind of interested and you've got either there's a destination you know of or you know people in a specific destination you want to recommend, all open to that. Just shoot me an email. Again, that
email address.
Yeah, that's the, just shoot me an email. Love to know more, talk more about it. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's Hawaii. Hawaii, not Big Island.
You could be right. So let me tell you a little thing about this. When we started out, we had all of Hawaii in one bucket. Okay, so we had Oahu and we had what is it, Maui and Big Island. And so the Hawaiian guides were up and down. They said, "What are you doing here? You know, you mainlander." so, and to be completely honest, I would have changed it in a dime. But the thing is, all our query patterns are all being built on that assumption. So it took us some work to do it, but we did it, and we did what they told us to do, by the way. So if it's, do you say it should be Hawaii, Hawaii? Because that's the name of the island?
So, but I'm pretty sure it's not called Big Island.
I think it's the Hawaii Islands is the name. And but people
call it Big Island. It's the more. No, I'm not changing my queries now. I'm done. I'm done.
But some people could get offended.
No, it's the opposite, really. They want, the Hawaiians want you to call it the Big Island, so they know what you're talking about.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, you're good.
Okay.
It's about users more.
So it's just you and your partner, like, or how big is your team?
He and less than half his partner is. His partner is full-time employee somewhere.
And so it's
he's
just you
part-time partner.
And I've had a few interns helping at various points.
and
Yes, we are bootstrapping. That's why, you know, did I say we were raising? If you're interested, just, you know, you can do a check.
I can get you a few interns.
Come again?
I can get you a few interns.
Sure.
Have you been able to get feedback from some of the people who've used the service, like the lean startup method, where you would actually be able to kind of test them in some way, whether it's just to give them a good survey and not just a nice little blurb, you know?
Yeah, we've got feedback. So people have liked the service. People have used it, find this extremely valuable. The value prop for a traveler is you are saving yourself about 25 to 30 hours of research. And you know, if you're busy and you've got a regular day job and stuff, what we've found is people fall into broadly two categories. There are kind who are backpackers or spontaneous, don't really want to plan, actually three categories. And there are people typically tend to start on the late 30s, mid 30s or early 30s, all the way to retirement, who are busy at work and can't really spend that time looking at guidebooks and stuff. And then the retired folks who actually love it. They love doing this work because, you know, it gives them stuff to do. They actually savor the experience of looking at all these sites and stuff. I had a gentleman tell me, you know, I really love having 3 screens all taken up by, you know, 6 different sites and doing comparisons and stuff. Don't take it away from me. I said, sure, great. I think I won't. But so there's 3 categories. And the people who, the segment of, you know, people who are busy, the folks who used to love it.
Okay, so that's really your target market, is that group that's very busy, has the means to travel,
Yeah.
and wants to do something besides book a tour. You know, as in, like, get on a bus and be ferried from place to place.
Right. The sweet spot, if I had to define the persona or the stereotype, is a person who typically cracks open the Lonely Planet
Okay.
and tries to figure it out. And that person, by the way, is me also. I mean, that's how I got around to it, right? And you know, people who like to know what they're doing and really care the details, but don't really have the time to do it. They love to have someone reliable do it.
Right, yeah, and it gets you started. You at least know there's somewhere to go besides Pike Place Market, because everybody goes to Pike Place Market. You just start, and even if you say, I don't know if I really want to do that, at least you'll have had a chance to think about stuff from an expert's point of view, and a local.
Yeah, and you know, here's the thing. If you're coming to Seattle for the very first time in your life, you have to go to Pike's Place and the Space Needle and the Museum of Flight and Ballard Locks. I mean, you can't leave this place and say, hey, I didn't go to the Space Needle, right? It's just, but then, so what? Then you got to decide, where do I live? It's Ballard, Belltown, Queen Anne, Beacon Hill, and tons of things. Do I rent a car or not? And these are decisions that kind of come second nature to us because we live here. But you're coming from, say, Shanghai or Delhi or wherever, it's super hard to put that together. And that's where the locals help, because for them, it's about maybe 20 minutes of work to put this down. They're just stating what they know, dumping straight.
Do you give them a template or something, a basic model of how to put the information together? I mean, what you did was interesting. It was pretty easy to follow.
That's a template, but having said that, our guides we actually invite them to innovate. So they'll actually, they'll put new data and structure it a little differently. But that's a basic template. And we're actually moving the template to, we're going to move it to a, I talked about this new planning portal stuff. We're actually going to bundle it. And so you have it a nice, you can push out your smartphone, you can look at it on a map interface, and you can click and see a calendar view and a map view at the same time. That stuff is coming along.
Okay. There are always more features, right?
There are always more features, yeah. We picked what we thought was kind of the minimum viable product. Trip planning alone is not a business model in itself. So we had to build the other two, and we kind of grow from there.
I don't feel this is minimum viable product. This is much more than that.
Well, it's if you look at so the minimum viable product, you just look at trip planning, is basically just trip planners. But when you look at it from the standpoint of what is it to make it a going viable business, you kind of need other monetization channels beyond just trip planning. And that's why we had the tours and deals. And you can argue we could have just done tours and not deals or something, but some of it is also trying a few things and seeing what sticks.
Right. But if I were to build an MVP, I would just provide two telephone numbers, one for the planners, one for the users, and that's all.
So some of it is also, the thing when you run an experiment is you want to make sure that it's a good enough experiment. What I mean by that is, let's take products, right? You can build a product in a not so interesting way, and people will shun it because it's not built very interesting. Like, let's take tablets is a great example, right?
I mean, you can keep all this web UI. What I mean is the backend. Apparently, you've reached a long way on the backend and the whole stack.
Oh yeah. No. So we had to show the people. So we could have well said you click him and you hit our telephone number, but it actually doesn't cost a whole lot to just do that.
Right. I mean, if I were to build an MVP, I would keep all your web page like this, but
right.
Then no backend, no database. I can do anything like that to
verify
my DOS and get investments back.
Well, so the part about the how do they give you information? For example, I don't know if we had a telephone number, somebody in Dubai would pick up the phone and call me. But if it's a website, he might, just click the book button and just do it in the comfort of his home. So, that's also part of the experience. How do you engage with the product? And if it's strictly telephone number, I don't know. I mean, it's a question we don't know the answer to really. Yeah.
If I could speak from my own experience, I think you're taking the fun part of exploring things. The tedious part is actually booking the flights and the ferries and so on. But I would love to. I do it like 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah.
But I want to explore special festivities during morning options, evening options.
You like explore, no, and you fall square into the category as well as the persona. Typically, we find that more with retired folks and all who love to discover stuff. But it's not true of only retired people. Everybody, even there are people who love doing that sort of research on their own. And you fall squarely in that category. And I agree totally. This product isn't really going to be. It'll take the fun out of you. But there's a fairly large number of people who love the traveling, don't like the planning, and it's for them.
Yeah, it's me. I just came back from Puerto Vallarta and I did not know what I was doing.
But how about you know you're particularly interested in?
I don't even know what I'm interested in. That's the problem, right? So I just tell them I need to go to Puerto Vallarta because
you want to
he went there. Right? He went there, right? So I want to go. So I go to Costco.com, look at the Puerto Vallarta trip. Click. Fine.
Yeah.
And now what? I show up, I land. Because now I have no idea what to do there. And I have 7 days. And my skin color has changed. It's actually freaking out. But that's what happens, right? So,
because I feel it's a very individual, personal taste kind of thing. If you go to beach in Puerto Vallarta, I like to go to villages. So very different.
Yeah, and actually that's why when you do the booking, there's a question that asks you what are you interested in, and I didn't walk you guys through it, but it actually asks you like, museums, this, that.
Right.
6 choices really, 6 or 7. And there's a free text box. You can express your interest and the trip planner will get back to you. The reason we also have trip planners listed out there, what we find is people identify with a specific person with a specific set of interests. Like you might find a historian out there and you might say, I'm interested in history, so I'm going to pick this person to plan my trip. That's the other angle to it.
And you have communication with the planner too, right?
Yeah, right, you do, yeah.
You say, I'm not interested in going to Frank's Market, and help you
Exactly,
find
yeah,
what it
yeah,
is
yeah.
to do.
You can tell them, these are 10 things I want to do. Or you can say, I know of 3 things, I've got 7 days, I'm interested in wine and culture, find me something to do. It's fairly flexible in that sense. Yeah.
How are the rates set up though? Like, if the person set their own rates?
They set their own rates. They set their own rates. The booking fee is a percentage of that amount. And yep.
So what are you focusing on?
Actually,
at this point right now? You have to go.
No, sorry. I'll just finish your question. If any of you want to try this product out, right? Drop me a line. We have some discount coupons. I'm happy to give you guys a few to sample the product. If you're traveling to any of our 12 destinations, I'm happy to do it.
It's coupon for the service people or it's coupon for the actual destination?
For the destination. So no, for the people. Sorry, I can't give you a deal on the tour, but what I can give you is a deal on planning a trip. I can give you a half off on that.
But then you're also interviewing every single person that's potential to be you.
Yeah, every trip planner is screened by us.
Wow.
Yes,
By you because.
it's by me. And actually, so I have an intern team doing this too.
Oh.
The way it works is I sit in on the first every intern. I sit into the first 7 screens, so I feel comfortable with the questioning and the level of, and then I scrutinize all the. But if you look at that list of people there, I've probably personally been on the line with about 40 of the 60. There's probably about 20 who, but again, after they meet through a very rigorous screen. I look at every writing sample that comes in.
So when you build a startup, you begin like a service support person and eventually become the CEO like he has, right? But you're essentially a service person then at the beginning.
Oh yeah, I mean, so when I started, right, I was calling trip planners here, and the first time I did it was funny. I tried to explain the whole concept over the phone, and it went nowhere. Right? I did this about 10 times, okay, and then I realized this isn't working. So I chat with them and say, hey, I've got this thing, and just say a blurb like, travel professional, do you want to connect with some other travelers? And we go meet for coffee, and then I start giving them the bigger overview of the service and what they needed to do for it. And then over time, we kind of got into more, to get it more precise so we could communicate the value prop quicker. It's an interesting, anything else? Okay, going once, going twice.
Very good, but I want to thank Dinesh for coming here.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. I had a great time.
As I said, he is an awesome guy. His app is neat. The Bean app, and I like the neat thing of the app. It's a very good framework, and you can experiment with it, learn it, gives you lots of tons and tips, not only about trips, but also about the Bean app. Okay? So enjoy that, and if you have interest in learning to build and deploy cloud services, we have a program going in this institute here that I have licensed it to this institute. I licensed it to NIU in Chicago and other institutions coming up. It's a roughly about 3-month-long program, focuses on technology, DevOps, and architecture, uses Chef, uses the concepts of Juice, and build out your cloud and build out and lay out your applications on top and create a service that you can do when you learn through the program that we have. And CIO Magazine rated us the number 8 in top 10 cloud programs, which is just rock solid awesome, and it is because of our graduates' success. They're absolutely getting hired wherever they want to go. So the special offer I mentioned stands for you. Email me, and we'll make sure that you get what I promised. $200 of Amazon.com gift card or any other form of, American Express credit card, gift card, whatever you want. That's the amount. No, and if you want AWS credit, I can double it.
How much is the program cost?
The cost is $4,000. It's payable to this institution here.
So it's a good night.
It's an evening class, 6 to 9. right in this room.
It's a prerequisite.
Prerequisites are actually very, very simple. The first thing that I personally interview when I get a person to join is to see if they really want to succeed in their life and an intense desire to study something new. We have had soldiers who are carrying guns in Afghanistan come out, go through the program, and are now data analysts at Expedia. We have cooks in the military. We have intelligence officers coming out who have, and you know who the soldiers are typically? What's the soldiers' profile? Grade 12, 10 plus 2. Okay. So it's the high school. And they go home.
Yeah, you can do it, then you can do it.
If CIA can do it,
Yeah, CIA can do it.
I don't know about CIA, I never touched that. Military, yes. The military, CIA is different. CIA is not military. Right? So just figure out that. Yeah, CIA is a different game. I don't know them. I don't want to know them.
Alright, start asking questions, it's not done.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, it was really good.
Yeah,
I'll
thank
shoot
you.
you an email, I know somebody who might be a good guy.
Please do. Yeah. Love to.
Are you the conversation?
I'm not in the travel business myself, I have a friend who runs salsa tours to Ohio. And so she
Okay.
was asking somebody.
Got it.
Yeah, I travel a lot.
I know you're like everyone in shop.
Right.
Right. Awesome. Thank you.
Very good job, guys. It's good to know the back end, how you actually hire people to do this. That's pretty fascinating. Thank you, he's driven. Kind of go.
That was, yeah.
Where you